4 years, 1,460 days. No call on Father's Day, no text at Christmas, not a single message when my brother Jerry had his heart surgery in Winnipeg, and I sat alone in a waiting room at St. Boniface Hospital, eating a vending machine sandwich at 2 in the morning, wishing I had my son beside me. I had made a kind of peace with it. Told myself this was just how things were now. Told myself he was busy, that he had his own life, that eventually he'd come around. You lie to yourself like that when the truth is too heavy to carry upright. Then my phone buzzed on a Wednesday evening in late October while I was half watching the Leafs lose to Montreal the way only the Leafs can. Slowly, painfully, in overtime. I didn't recognize the number at first, but I recognized the cadence of the message before I'd even finished reading it. Your own son's words have a particular shape, even after 4 years of nothing. Dad, Celeste and I are in town this week. We should do dinner. I've made a reservation at Canoe on Friday at 7. Come prepared. We'll need you to bring a bank draft for $180,000. Don't come if that's not going to happen. I read it twice, then a third time out loud, just to hear what it sounded like in my own voice, in my own living room in Oakville, the television going in the background. Not I've missed you, Dad, not how are you doing, not even a plain hi, just a reservation and a price tag, an entrance fee to see my own son. I set the phone face down on the side table next to my cold coffee and sat there for a while. The Leafs scored in the final seconds, meaningless by then, and the announcer's voice filled the room like noise from another world. Welcome to Dad's Fierce Revenge. Get comfortable. This one's going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment below so I know where you're watching from. I think you're going to want to hear how this ends. I should tell you a bit about who I am before we get to the part where everything breaks open, because context matters, and I'm not the kind of man who just reacts without it. I spent 35 years as a structural engineer at a civil firm in Toronto. Bridges, mostly provincial highway work, a couple of transit projects. The kind of job where precision isn't a preference, it's a necessity, because the alternative is someone getting killed. You develop a certain relationship with detail when you spend your career knowing that a miscalculation by 2 millimeters can bring a structure down. You learn to trace problems back to their source before they compound. I retired at 62 with a pension, my RRSP, and a paid-off house in Oakville backing onto a ravine that I still can't believe I own. After 35 years of early mornings and highway traffic and site visits and January wind chill that would make your eyes water, I had earned that ravine. My son had always called me boring for it. Too careful, too methodical, too focused on the structure of things. He wanted flair. He got that from his mother's side. She and I separated when he was 19, his final year of high school. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way of screaming and broken furniture. It was quieter than that and somehow worse. We ran out of something. She moved to Calgary 3 years later, remarried a man who sells commercial real estate and seems genuinely happy with the life she built. Good for her. I mean that sincerely. What I didn't see coming, not soon enough anyway, was the slow re-education of my son that happened over those years. 6 years of your father is just tight with money. Your father doesn't understand ambition. Your father never wanted the best for us. Small doses, regular intervals. By the time he was 26 and had moved in with the woman who would become his fiancée, he already looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture that's seen better days. I have one memory I come back to a lot. We were at the rink in Oakville when he was 7. He'd just learned to stop on skates, properly stop, with the spray, and he was so proud of it that he skated all the way back to the boards just to make sure I'd seen it. His helmet was too big for his head, and his nose was running from the cold, and he was grinning so hard it looked like it might hurt. That memory lives right at the base of my ribs. It doesn't go away. 4 years after the last real conversation, a bad one, a fight about money I'll get to soon, I sat in my Oakville kitchen holding a phone with his words on the screen. $180,000. Don't come if that's not going to happen. I didn't answer that night. I got up and walked through the house instead, through the hallway where there's still a pencil mark on the doorframe at 5'1". The summer he turned 13, right before the growth spurt that made him taller than me by the time he was 15. I didn't answer the mark either. I just stood there with my hand against the frame and let myself remember. I didn't reply until Thursday morning. When I did, I kept it to one line. I'll be there. Now, here's what I want to be clear about. I did not hire anyone. I did not set a trap. What I did was what any engineer does when something doesn't add up. I sat down in front of my laptop with a cup of coffee, and I started asking questions. Celeste ran what she called a boutique alternative investment advisory firm. She'd described it to me once on the phone, 2 years earlier, during the one conversation I'd managed to have with my son in all that time. She'd called it pre-IPO opportunity investment, which is a phrase carefully designed to sound sophisticated while telling you very little. She had a website with a professional headshot and a small team listed with credentials I couldn't immediately place. The first thing I noticed was that the regulatory information at the bottom of the page was thin. There's a registration requirement in Ontario for anyone managing client investments. The Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization oversees it, and the Ontario Securities Commission maintains a public database. I pulled it up. Her name wasn't there. Her firm wasn't there. I told myself maybe I was looking in the wrong place, maybe it was registered differently, maybe I'd missed something. I checked again, still nothing. I kept going. 40 minutes into it, I found a civil suit filed through the Ontario Superior Court of Justice 18 months ago. Two former clients alleging that approximately $290,000 CAD in funds had been placed into accounts that were unregistered and unregulated, and that they had received neither returns nor their principal back upon withdrawal request. The suit had been partially settled, term sealed. I sat back in my kitchen chair and looked at the window for a moment. The ravine was gray with November. A chickadee was doing something in the cedars. In my career, when a structure showed a crack, you didn't ignore it. You didn't tell yourself it was probably fine, you followed it. By Thursday evening, I had found a second civil claim, different plaintiffs, same pattern. You could see the shape of it clearly by then if you knew what to look for. Money collected under the promise of pre-IPO share access. Funds moved into accounts that were not in any way connected to the investments described. Clients receiving updates, professional, calm, reassuring updates, while their money was already gone. And then, buried in a Friday afternoon release from the Ontario Securities Commission that would have been easy to scroll past. A notice of investigation opened 6 weeks earlier. Her firm was named explicitly. A temporary cease trading order had been issued against the company and its principal. The investigation was ongoing. I printed everything. Every page, civil claims, registration gaps, the OSC notice, the cease trade order. I put it all in a manila folder, the same kind I've kept engineering inspection reports in for 30 years. Then I sat at my kitchen table with that folder in front of me, and I thought about my son for a long time. The money wasn't the point. I want to be very clear about that. $180,000 is not an abstraction to me. I worked for it. I saved it. I said no to a lot of things over the years to have it. But the money was not why I was sitting there with a sick feeling behind my sternum. What I was sitting with was the understanding that my son was weeks away from marrying a woman who was running out of time before federal investigators showed up at her door. And he either didn't know or didn't want to know. Either way, he needed me to walk into that restaurant on Friday. I will be honest with you. I also did not know if he would let me help him. 4 years is a long time. People build identities out of the stories they tell about other people, and he had been telling himself a particular story about me for long enough that it might be load-bearing by now. Friday came faster than I wanted it to. I wore the same navy blazer I've had for years, the one that still fits properly, even if the shoulders have taken on the shape of a man who spent decades leaning over drafting tables. I drove the Volvo into the city, found parking, walked through the cold along King Street. Canoe is up on the 54th floor of the TD Tower. Nice restaurant. The kind of place with white tablecloths and a wine list that arrives bound in leather and prices that would make a sensible person pause. I spotted them before they saw me. My son was sitting across from her, both of them facing the window, the city spread out below in the dark. She was in a blazer, burgundy, sharp-shouldered, with her hair pulled back in a way that looked efficient rather than warm. My son had on a suit jacket that looked new. He looked older, not in a bad way, just older. She saw me first. Her face arranged itself into a smile before I'd even reached the table, the kind of smile that has a function rather than a feeling behind it. He stood to shake my hand. That's what we were now, a handshake. We sat. A waiter appeared and disappeared. There was small talk, the Alberta cold snap, some hockey reference he made, a comment about my drive-in from Oakville. She asked questions that sounded curious but weren't, the kind of questions that are really just a way of measuring you, figuring out your dimensions before the pitch. 15 minutes in, she folded her hands on the table. So, Frank, we're both busy people, so I think we can speak plainly. She'd been using my name since I sat down, which is a sales technique I recognize. We're getting married in 6 weeks. Your son and I have a significant growth opportunity in front of us. One of our investor rounds is closing and we're bringing in family at a preferred rate. What we need from you is a bank draft for $180,000, deposited by Monday morning. In return, you'll have a meaningful stake in something that's going to matter. She said family the way you'd say category, not as a welcome, as a classification. I looked at my son. He was looking at the tablecloth. That's the plan, he said quietly. Not an endorsement exactly, more like a confirmation that this was in fact what we were doing here. I need to ask something first, I said to him, not to her, before anything else. Of course, she said, though I hadn't been talking to her. How long have you known about the cease trading order? The table went very quiet. She recovered faster than he did. I don't know what you think you've read, but there are regulatory processes that get triggered all the time in this industry. I read the OSC's own notice, I said, published on their website 6 weeks ago. Your firm is named. A temporary cease trade order was issued. The investigation is active. I kept my voice the same tone I'd use explaining a load calculation. Not angry, not triumphant, just factual. There are also 2 civil claims filed in the Ontario Superior Court, former clients. The pattern in both is consistent. I reached into the inside of my blazer. I'd folded the folder and slid it in there rather than carry it across the room, and I laid it on the table. Not dramatically. Just set it down in the middle of the white cloth next to the breadbasket. Everything you need to understand about who you're about to marry is in there, I said to my son. Not to hurt you, to protect you. That's the only reason I'm sitting at this table tonight. She started to speak. I'll give her credit. She was composed, measured, the beginning of a reasonable-sounding explanation already forming. But I wasn't watching her. I was watching my son's hand move slowly across the tablecloth toward the folder. She put her hand on his arm. He stopped. The way he stopped, not reluctantly, not conflicted, just stopped, told me everything I needed to know about where we were. This wasn't a man who'd been deceived. This was a man who had decided, at some point without me present, that belonging was worth more than understanding. That staying in her orbit, even without asking the right questions, was preferable to standing out here in the cold, with the questions in the folder, and a father he hadn't spoken to in 4 years. I don't know how long I sat there after that. It felt like a long time and probably wasn't. I'm not signing anything, I said, and there's no bank draft. Not tonight, not Monday, not ever. I pushed back from the table, left enough cash to cover whatever they'd ordered, because that's the kind of man I am. I wasn't going to leave a server short for what happened at their table. I buttoned my blazer the way I always do before leaving a meeting. I said goodbye to my son by name, and I walked out. The elevator down from the 54th floor takes about 30 seconds. I stood in the corner of it with my hands in my pockets and felt something in my chest that I still don't have a clean word for. Not anger, not relief, something heavier and more honest than both of those. I drove home along the QEW with the lake somewhere to my right in the dark in November, sitting on everything, and I did not turn the radio on. I wanted the quiet. 3 days. That's how long the silence lasted. I spent Saturday doing things with my hands, raked the leaves at the back of the property that I'd been ignoring, stacked some of the firewood I'd had delivered in September. The ravine was unchanged by any of it, which was something I appreciated. Sunday I drove out to Jerry's place in Burlington, sat in his living room, had tea, told him enough without telling him everything. He said the thing brothers say when they don't have better words. Give it time. He also said, you did the right thing, which I already knew but needed to hear from another person. Monday evening I had the news on low in the background while I made dinner. The item ran near the end of the broadcast, one of those brief mentions that follows the main stories like a footnote. An alternative investment firm operating out of Toronto had been the subject of a coordinated enforcement action by the Ontario Securities Commission and the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team. The principal of the firm had been charged that morning with fraud over $5,000, misappropriation of investor funds, and conducting an unregistered investment business under the Securities Act. Someone had captured it on their phone from outside a Bay Street office building. She was coming out through the glass lobby doors, burgundy blazer, walking alongside 2 officers who weren't in any hurry, the way officers walk when they already know how it ends. I turned the television off and sat in the dark for a while. I won't tell you I felt triumphant. I want to be honest with you about that, because it would be easy to describe this as some kind of victory, and it wasn't, not even close. My son's fiancée was in custody. His wedding was 6 weeks away. Whatever money he'd had near her orbit was frozen in accounts he probably didn't even know existed. None of that felt good. It felt exactly as bad as it should feel when something you tried to prevent happens anyway, just outside the reach of what you could do to stop it. I made myself a cup of tea I didn't finish and waited, because I already knew what was coming next. He called at 11:18. You reported her? His voice was flat and very tight, the tone people use when they're past what anger can carry. I didn't. I never called anyone. The investigation was already open when I walked into that restaurant. The OSC had been working on this for 6 weeks before Friday. Silence. Everything in that folder was public record, court filings, the commission's own website, nothing I manufactured or arranged. I just printed what was already there. More silence. She's been charged, he said. I heard. The wedding venue, the deposits are all gone. Her firm's assets are frozen, and apparently she had some of my money in accounts I didn't even know about. A long pause. How much did you know going into Friday? I knew enough to be frightened for you. He hung up not long after that, not in anger, more like someone who doesn't have the capacity for any more words in that particular hour. I understood that. 2 nights later, at 9:45 on a Wednesday, I heard someone on my front porch. Knocking, fast, then stopping, then fast again, the rhythm of someone who isn't entirely certain whether to knock at all. I went to the door, opened it. He was standing there in the good coat I'd bought him for his 25th birthday, the one he'd worn when he got his first real job. He hadn't upgraded it in the years since. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had the look of someone who hadn't slept in the way that goes past tiredness into something more structural, the kind of exhaustion that gets into the bones. Dad, that was all he had at first. I stepped back from the door, not blocking him, just taking a breath before what came next. Come in, I said. I'll put the kettle on. He came in. Sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd read his text in the dark 3 weeks earlier. I didn't push him. Made the tea, set a mug down in front of him, sat across. The house was quiet the way it's always quiet. The refrigerator, the clock in the hallway, the sound of the ravine if you paid attention. I didn't know, he said, finally. About the fraud. I want you to know that, Dad. I didn't know what she was actually doing. I believe you. I knew she was aggressive about the business, that she was always looking for new investors. But I thought that was just ambition. I thought the company was struggling and she was fighting for it. I didn't know it was built on other people's money. I know. He wrapped both hands around the mug, didn't drink from it. I should have taken the folder, he said, at the restaurant. When you put it on the table, she put her hand on my arm and I sat there. He shook his head slowly, looking down. She had this way of making every warning feel like an attack. Every question someone asked about the business she'd frame as jealousy or control or not believing in her. I got so used to defending her that I stopped asking my own questions. I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said what I needed to say, not to win anything, not to be right, just because he needed to hear it clearly and I needed to say it. You walked out of my house when you were 25, I said. Not because of anything I actually did, because I wouldn't drain my retirement savings for someone I'd never met, someone you'd been with for 8 months, who needed startup capital for a business I'd been given 12 minutes to evaluate. You called me selfish, said I didn't support you, said things I don't need to repeat here because you already know what they were. I kept my voice even, not cold, just steady, and I sat with that for 4 years because I thought, he's young, he's in love, he'll figure it out. I gave you that space. He was listening, really listening, which was something I had needed for a long time before I'd understood how badly. But I need you to hear me clearly about Friday. I didn't go to that restaurant to be right. I went because you are my son. Because there is nothing in 4 years of silence that makes you less that. I found out the woman you were going to marry was under active investigation for fraud, and I walked into a room where I wasn't particularly welcome, and I put the truth in front of you. That's it. That's the whole of it. He put his head in his hands. Not dramatically, just the way people do when something lands the way it's supposed to. I'm going to help you the way a father helps, I said. I'll cover your legal consultation fees while you work out your exposure. I have a contact in commercial litigation, solid, experienced, someone I trust. I'll make sure you have food and a safe place to be while you put things back together. I put my hand flat on the table between us, not grabbing just there. But I am not a backup account. I am not a reserve to be drawn on when a situation goes wrong and someone else's consequences need covering. You're 30 years old. That means the weight of your choices lands on you. It also means you're not too old to start getting it right. He looked up. His eyes were still red and his expression had moved through several things in the past few minutes. Shame, something like relief, and underneath both of them, what looked like the very beginning of the end of a story he'd been telling himself for a long time. Okay, he said. Just that. Okay. We sat there for another hour, didn't solve everything, didn't need to. Some of what broke between us is going to take longer than a kitchen table conversation to set right, and I know that, and I think he does too. But by the time he left, just after 11, out the front door and down the walk to the street, something in the house felt different. Less hollow, maybe. The kind of difference you don't measure but notice, like when a room gets more light because someone thought to clean the windows. I stood at the window and watched his taillights disappear at the end of the street. Then I went back to the kitchen, rinsed both mugs, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. There's a lesson I spent 35 years learning from the work I did. A bridge doesn't fail because of one crack. It fails because the crack was ignored, because someone decided, consciously or not, to keep loading the structure past what the warning signs were telling them. What saves a structure isn't pretending the crack isn't there. What saves it is finding it, understanding it, and doing the hard, slow work of repair. Sometimes that takes longer than you'd want. Sometimes you have to take the load off entirely before the repair can hold. My son is not a lost cause. He never was. He was a man who got lost, which is a different thing entirely. I don't know exactly where we go from here. He's got a road ahead of him, legal complications to sort through, financial damage to count for, the particular kind of grief that comes from realizing the person you'd built your future around wasn't who you thought. That's real, and it's going to take time, and I'm not going to rush him through any of it. What I know is this: my door is open, not unconditionally, not as a bank, not as a place where 4 years of silence and a $180,000 demand get quietly erased, and we all pretend none of it happened, but open, because that's what you do when there's still something worth opening it for. And there is. There always was. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. Hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you at the next one.